The night Corinne found the receipt, she wasn't even snooping. She'd just been looking for the car insurance papers, the ones Liam always said he'd filed but never actually did, and there it was, folded into thirds and stuffed behind the glove compartment like an afterthought. The Ritz-Carlton, Ottawa. 2 nights. A bottle of Chateau Margaux. Room service for 2. The dates matched the weekend he'd told her he was in Thunder Bay for a conference. Their daughter had been 11 days old. Corinne sat in the driveway for a long time after that, not crying, just sitting. The baby was inside with her mother, who'd flown in from Moncton to help, and the October air coming through the cracked window smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. And Corinne thought, so this is what it feels like when everything you thought was real turns out to be a stage set. She didn't say a word to Liam that night, or the next night, or the night after that. She cooked dinner. She fed the baby. She smiled at her mother's jokes. And while Liam sat on the couch watching the Leafs lose, she opened her laptop on the kitchen table and sent 3 emails. One to her brother-in-law, who was a real estate lawyer in Gatineau, one to her financial advisor, and one to her oldest friend, Simone, who had been through a divorce herself 4 years prior, and had come out the other side owning a condo in Westmount and driving a car that was fully paid off. The subject line of all 3 emails was the same. I need to talk. Soon. Don't mention this to anyone. Here is what people never understand about women like Corinne. They are not cold. They are not calculating in the way that word implies something sinister. What they are is organized. What they are is patient. What they are is tired of being underestimated by men who mistake their silence for surrender. Corinne had grown up in a row house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, the oldest of 4. Her father worked at the Volvo plant and her mother cleaned offices on weekends. There was never quite enough money, and Corinne had learned early that if you wanted something to happen, you had to make it happen yourself, because no one was coming to do it for you. She'd put herself through Dalhousie on scholarships and part-time shifts at a coffee counter on Spring Garden Road. She'd graduated with honors in accounting and taken a job at a mid-sized firm in Halifax before eventually following a promotion to Ottawa, where she'd met Liam at a mutual friend's housewarming in Glebe. Liam was charming. Liam was funny. Liam had a way of making everyone in a room feel like the most interesting person he'd ever encountered, which, she would later understand, was a skill he'd honed specifically because it was useful to him. He was in commercial property development and made significantly more money than she did, and he was generous with it. At first. Dinners in the Byward Market, a weekend in Quebec City, a ring she hadn't expected. She should have paid more attention to what he was like when things didn't go his way. They'd bought a house in Canada 2 years into their marriage. A 4-bedroom with a double garage and a backyard that backed onto a greenbelt. The kind of house Corinne had grown up believing was for other people. The mortgage was in both names, but Liam had made the down payment and he mentioned this, casually, the way he mentioned many things, casually, whenever a disagreement arose. I put in the down payment, as if love were a ledger, as if a marriage were a receipt you could point to later and say, see, I paid more. That means I win. The baby whose name was June had been planned. Liam had wanted a child. Corinne had wanted a child. That part was real, or at least she believed it was. The pregnancy had been difficult. Morning sickness that lasted until her 6th month, a scare at 22 weeks that had put her on partial bed rest, a delivery that had gone sideways at the last moment and ended in an emergency C-section under fluorescent lights at the Queensway Carlton, while someone played radio pop through a small Bluetooth speaker by the window. Liam had been there for all of it. He'd held her hand. He'd cried when June was put into his arms. And then, 11 days later, he'd taken a woman named, she would find out later, Vanessa to the Ritz-Carlton in Ottawa and ordered room service and a bottle of wine that cost more than Corinne's weekly grocery budget. She kept that receipt, photographed it, front and back, sent the photo to her own email and then to Simone, filed the original back exactly where she'd found it, folded into thirds, behind the insurance papers he'd never organized. Then she drove home and made pasta for dinner and did not say a single word. Simone came down from Montreal 3 weeks later, ostensibly to meet the baby. They sat at the kitchen table after Liam had left for work, June asleep in the bassinet in the next room, and Simone spread out a notepad and uncapped a pen and said, "Okay, tell me everything." So Corinne did. Simone listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Corinne finished, Simone looked at the notepad, which she'd been filling with small, tight writing the whole time, and said, "How much do you actually know about the finances?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Corinne knew her own income. She knew the mortgage. She knew their joint checking account and their joint savings, into which they each deposited a fixed monthly amount. What she did not know, she realized as Simone spoke, was the full picture of Liam's assets. His business accounts, the property development projects he had partial stakes in, the investment accounts he managed through a broker she'd never met, the numbered company he'd registered 3 years ago, which she'd signed something for once and not read carefully because it was 11 o'clock at night and June had been kicking so hard she could barely concentrate. "You need to see a lawyer," Simone said, "before he has any idea that you know." Corinne had already made that appointment. She had it in her phone under the alias of a dental cleaning. "And the house?" Simone said. "The house," Corinne said. They looked at each other. "My brother-in-law says that in Ontario, matrimonial home equity is split regardless of who made the down payment," Corinne said. "That's provincial law. Doesn't matter what Liam says about the down payment." Simone made a small satisfied sound. "Tell me more about this house." The plan took 4 months. Not because Corinne was reckless, quite the opposite. She had learned, from watching her mother navigate 30 years with a man who was good but not always easy, that the worst thing you could do in a difficult situation was move too fast. Speed made mistakes. Speed left gaps. Speed was what people did when they were acting on emotion rather than strategy. She was not acting on emotion. She had already dealt with the emotion privately, mostly in the car on her way to and from the office in the weeks after her maternity leave ended, when she would grip the steering wheel on the 417 and let herself be whatever she needed to be for exactly the length of the drive, and then put herself back together before she got to wherever she was going. Grief was allowed. Anger was allowed. But both of them needed to be done on her schedule, not his. Liam, in the meantime, continued being Liam. He came home at 7 most evenings, sometimes 8. He was affectionate with June. She could not fault him for that, and she didn't try to. He brought Corinne flowers twice in those 4 months, which was twice more than he'd brought in the previous year. And she accepted them and put them in water and said, "Thank you," and wondered if that was guilt, or habit, or some combination of both, that he'd stopped being able to distinguish. She'd also found the second receipt by then, and the third. Not looking, just finding. The third one had been in the breast pocket of a blazer she'd sent to the dry cleaner by mistake. The cleaner had left it in the bag with a little sticky note. "Found in pocket, returning to you." A cheerful green checkmark drawn by hand. The receipt was from a restaurant on Elgin Street she and Liam had been to together exactly once, for their 3rd anniversary. She photographed that one too, added it to the folder she kept on her personal laptop, which was encrypted, and backed up to a drive she kept at her mother's house in Moncton. Her lawyer, a woman named Hendricks, who practiced family law out of an office on Spark Street and had the kind of still, even gaze that made you feel like nothing you said would surprise her, had walked her through everything. The matrimonial home, the equalization of net family property, the documentation she'd need, the timing. "Don't move out," Hendricks had said. "Under no circumstances move out of that house voluntarily before the separation is official, and do not tell him what's coming." Corinne had nodded. "And the child?" "She stays with me," Corinne said. "That's not a question." Hendricks had looked at her for a moment. "No," she'd agreed. "I don't think it is." The house sold in 9 days. That part still made Corinne's chest feel something she could only describe as clean. Like the first breath of cold air when you walk out of an overheated building. She'd listed it in March, peak Ottawa real estate season, when the snowbanks were still melting, but buyers were already out in force after the long winter. Her brother-in-law had helped her understand exactly what she was entitled to. As co-owner, as spouse, as the person who had lived in that house and paid that mortgage and installed the backsplash in the kitchen herself one weekend when Liam was at one of his conferences. The offer came in on a Thursday. She accepted on Friday. She told no one except Simone, her mother, and Hendricks. Liam was that weekend in Vancouver, another conference. She had not asked about this one. She and her mother packed up the house in 3 days. Her mother, who had understood everything after a single 30-minute phone call in November, and had not once told Corinne what she should or shouldn't do, simply showed up with boxes. Corinne kept June's things, her own things, and a select portion of the household items she'd paid for. All of which she'd documented, receipts and photos going back 3 years. Another folder on the encrypted drive. The furniture she'd chosen. The dishes that had been a wedding gift from her side of the family. The stand mixer she'd bought with her own money before they were even married. She took the car that was registered in her name. She left the other one, his, technically, though she'd driven it more, in the garage with the keys on the kitchen counter. She left the keys to the house on the counter beside them, because the house no longer needed a key from her. She also left something else on the counter, which she had thought about for a while and finally decided on, a single printed page. Not a note, not an explanation, not an accusation, just a document. A copy of the separation agreement Hendricks had prepared, already signed on Corinne's side, with a sticky note attached that said, in her clear accountant's handwriting, "Your lawyer will explain the rest." She drove to her mother's apartment in Westboro, where the baby seat was already installed in the spare bedroom, and there was soup on the stove, and she sat at the kitchen table with June on her lap, and called Simone. "It's done," she said. Simone made a sound that was half law, half exhale. "How do you feel?" Corinne thought about it. "Like someone opened a window," she said. Liam's flight landed Sunday evening. He called her at 9:14 p.m. She saw his name on her phone and let it ring. He called again at 9:22, then at 9:31. Then he started texting. She read them without responding. "Where are you? The house looks completely different. Call me. What is going on? Corinne. Where is June? Call me right now." At 9:47 he called her mother. Her mother, who had been waiting for exactly this, answered the phone with the unhurried calm of a woman who had raised 4 children and built a life with her own hands and was no longer impressed by men who raised their voices. "She's fine," her mother said. "June is fine. Contact Corinne's lawyer. Good night, Liam." And then she hung up. He showed up at the apartment building at 11 p.m. He buzzed the intercom 4 times. He called from the parking lot. Her mother's neighbor, a retired police officer named Armand, had already been briefed and came out to the hall to sit in a chair by the elevator with a cup of tea and an expression that said he was prepared to be there for however long the situation required. Liam did not come upstairs. At midnight he sent one final text. "This is insane. I don't know what you think you're doing, but we need to talk. Call me." Corinne put the phone face down on the nightstand, checked that June was breathing with the gentle even rhythm that still, every time, made her feel something she had no words for, and went to sleep. She slept better than she had in months. The next morning she learned, through Hendricks, that Liam had already retained a lawyer of his own. This did not surprise her. Liam moved fast. That was one thing she'd always acknowledged about him. He was decisive, or at least he appeared to be. What he was less good at was thoroughness. He moved fast and then cleaned up the mess later, and the messes were always bigger than he'd anticipated. This was the biggest one he'd ever made. His lawyer made an initial offer within the week. He would buy out her share of the matrimonial home. Corinne's lawyer sent back a counter that accounted for full equalization of net family property under Ontario law, which meant not just the house, but the full picture of everything accumulated during the marriage. Every asset, every account, the numbered company, the investment portfolio she now had 3 months of bank statements for, obtained entirely legally through the disclosure process. She heard, through mutual friends, people she chose carefully to stay in contact with, that Liam had not expected this, that he had assumed she would be emotional and reactive and therefore manageable, that he had said to at least one person that Corinne was being vindictive. She found this amusing, in a distant sort of way. She was not being vindictive, she was being an accountant. The part that people, particularly people who'd heard the story secondhand, filtered through Liam's version, seemed to miss was this. Corinne had not taken anything she wasn't entitled to. She had not hidden assets. She had not denied him access to June, though she had established through her lawyer that access would be structured, documented, and conducted at an appropriate distance from Vanessa, whose existence Corinne had officially been aware of since the first week of the legal process, when Liam's own lawyer had made the mistake of referencing her in a disclosure document. Vanessa, as it turned out, had also moved on within 6 weeks of the separation becoming official. Corinne had not sought this information. It had arrived via Simone, who had it from someone who knew someone. She found someone else, Simone had reported. Apparently Liam was not exactly easy to live with once all the logistics became complicated. Corinne had absorbed this information without comment. She did privately feel something about it, not satisfaction exactly, more like recognition. The recognition of a pattern she had once been too close to see, that what Liam needed was not a particular woman. What he needed was a woman who did not yet know him well enough to see what was underneath the charm. And that was not a problem anyone else could solve for him. June was 8 months old when Corinne signed the final settlement agreement. She sat in Hendricks's office on Sparks Street with June on her lap, because the babysitter had fallen through, and Hendricks had said without blinking that she'd worked in noisier conditions. June spent the signing examining her own fist with the intense concentration she brought to most things, and Corinne worked through the document page by page. The settlement was, by any reasonable measure, fair to both parties, which was what the law intended. She was not walking away with nothing. She was not walking away with everything. She was walking away with her daughter, her savings, her share of the equity, and the particular clarity that comes from having to figure out, in a very compressed period of time, exactly what you're made of. What she was made of, it turned out, was more than she'd needed so far. She walked out of that office into a cold April afternoon. Ottawa still not fully decided between winter and spring, the kind of gray-blue sky that could go either way. She buckled June into the stroller and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. The street was busy with the particular midday energy of a city that runs on government hours. People in good coats walking fast, a construction crew doing something loud to the corner building, a coffee cart sending steam up into the cold air. She texted Simone, "It's done. Official." Simone sent back 3 words. "Boss move, Corinne." And then, because June was already making the noise that meant she was bored of being stationary and ready to be moving again, Corinne tucked her phone in her pocket and pointed the stroller north and started walking. She didn't look back, not because she was performing something. Not because she was trying to make a point. Just because there was nothing back there that she needed anymore. The city was in front of her, the baby was kicking against the stroller footrest with both feet in the cheerful, senseless way that babies do when they're happy, and the wind was cold on Corinne's face, and she was for the first time in a very long time, simply moving forward with her whole self. Unencumbered, unheld, entirely her own.